Hello everyone, this is a video on some of the general improvements that were made for IronCAD 2016 Product Update 1. One of the key things that we made is an enhancement to an old functionality that we had, which is this group command. Typically when you created groups before, it would actually, you could select multiple parts, features at different levels, and you can say group and it would actually go and create a whole other category down here called groups, and you can actually have a quick way to select groups to hide and show and things like that. We've enhanced it to be more powerful. So in this case, I have a top level assembly, I have some parts below it, and I just kind of give you an idea how it worked. So if you had, for example, picked this part and this part, I'm holding the shift key down when I select those two parts, they belong underneath this assembly. So if we right click at this point when I have these two selected on these objects, we have this option called group selected. Okay, what it will tell you is if you noticed that these two parts exist underneath a common parent. This assembly is this common parent, and it gives you an option. So if you say no, what it would do is create this. This is what we would have in the past, which is this group level item out here that you could select. You could right click to ungroup, suppress, show and hide. Some commands we added to this. Not all these existed before, but we added some commands to these. The thing is that this information is only stored with this actual scene file, so it would only be visible. If I open this file or put it in the catalog, this grouping doesn't exist anywhere. Okay, what's enhanced? Let's just go ahead and just remove this group. Let's do that process again. In this case, when I say group selected, I'm going to go ahead and hit yes. Since these both exist underneath this parent, watch what happens in the tree on the left when you hit yes. It actually changed the structure of the assembly. It actually now has a group folder, and in the case for assemblies, the products or the parts below that. This is your original structure, which you still have. You can still go here and select and work just as you normally would, but now you have this group folder underneath it. And it acts just like the one at the scene level, is when you select on it, it'll highlight those objects. You have the same capabilities to ungroup, suppress, hide shapes. For example, if I want to hide those, I can see those things inside of there. I can show those shapes back, and I can create multiple of these things. If I select these two parts, for example, I can group those, and if I hit yes here, again, it'll just create another group underneath here. So now I have my group for those two parts in different groups. The advantage of this is actually stored with this assembly. So if I stuck this into the catalog or as an external linked file, anywhere this part goes, these will also maintain, this whole structure maintains, so you always have that. It comes really apparent when you get down to the feature level. Notice that I have these hole features here on this particular part. If I expand this, you'll see a whole bunch of holes here, and if I can do the same thing, I want to group all the holes in an entire part. I can select all those, right click, say group selected, and again, since it exists as a feature element, it gives me an option. I can create my standard grouping, which doesn't go with the part, or I can hit yes, and now this guy is part of this particular part. Wherever this part goes, these groups go, which is really nice. You have a feature grouping that shows all your features, just normal way you work and find things. But if I don't want to see those holes right now, I can just have my group of my holes or whatever. I can just say suppress those shapes, and now I can work on my part, whatever I want to do, or regeneration is faster. Whenever I'm done, I can unsuppress the shapes and get back to my thing, my working environment. I don't have to select inside the tree or in the scene to do it. So that grouping capability is a nice improvement, and it basically gives you a nice way to actually structure your thing. You could have like all your holes, your solid features, whatever, various things that you may want to group together as features or different parts inside of a master assembly or whatever level. As long as you have a common parent, you can create these groups underneath it, which is really, really handy in this regard. Some other things we wanted to show some improvements for have been with the TriBall. For example, I'm going to drop a part out here to use for an example. And notice when you drag and drop, you have these highlights. Notice when I select on a face, you get a center point, or on this edge, you get that midpoint edge, so you know where the midpoint is, or vertices, whatever. Let me just go ahead and drop this particular part on here, and now we want to make a link pattern of that. Say in case we want to actually align this along the midpoint of this edge. Typically, you turn on the TriBall of your part, you would right click and say midpoint, and then it would have a expanded group sort of like this. It popped out and you would say to midpoint, edge, midpoint, or center point. We enhanced this to actually just show 2 point, center point, and we expanded these to make it a lot faster, so you don't have to do that pull over group. So you can just go right to edge, boom, and you're done. That's one kind of improvement that we've added to it. Another improvement is if you just visually drag your cursor on the center point of the TriBall, notice now that dot is now visible. In many cases, especially like cases like this, you have no idea where the midpoint is. You know it's somewhere in this vicinity, but you don't know exactly where. And before you had to kind of drag along this until it kind of snapped into the right place. Now I can just go to that edge. I see where the center point is. I can quickly go there and be done. Very nice little simple improvement, but makes it a whole lot easier to find that midpoint of the edge. Another enhancement with these midpoint capabilities is we enhance the center point dragging behavior to have a shift behavior. Similar to what we did with these handles, these were automatic, that they would align to parallel to edge or perpendicular face when you drag on these orientation handles. The center point of the TriBall, we had to do it with the shift key because we didn't want the behavior to disallow this simple dragging capability. But if you now hold your shift key down and when you hit that edge, it'll actually snap to the nearest point that you're on. So if I move over here a little bit, I'm nearer the midpoint, I'm nearest the end point. So I can quickly just move, boom, done. So let's watch that again. I'm on the center, hold my shift key, drag over here, I'm on my midpoint, I'm done. Okay, no more looking for dots, no more right clicking to get to the center point of the edge or the mid, any of those options. I can just drag and boom, I'm on the midpoint if I'm close to that edge or closest to that point, or to the end point if you want as well. So a very handy tool with the TriBall, make the interaction or productivity much faster, which with this very common option that people do all the time is this midpoint locator. So very cool. Let me step over to some other general improvements. One of the areas we enhanced was the chamfer command or chamfer edge command. It's been a common request on the community for some time now, and so we went ahead and finally enhanced it to add this variable chamfer, if you will. You have a to distance and a variable distance. The to distance is simply, right now, we can enhance this later, is just a start distance. It's basically a distance setting for the start and the end. So say if we want to make our start a little bit bigger, like 0.2, and we'll make our ending a little smaller, we can pick 1. And when I pick our edge, you'll notice this is 0.2, that's 0.1. Let's make it a little bit more apparent. If I make it 0.4, you can see that grow. I'll just make it 1 so you can actually see we now have that variable chamfer edge on the side of there. Okay, so very nice improvement for that type of chamfer. You can also go in and use, similar to the blend edge command, right now in the beta it doesn't fully work, but I'll give you an idea how it works. When you use that variable, you can pick an edge and then you can just simply select on here and pick points along here where you want those, and when you have those points you just grab these handles and size them to adjust your chamfer setting inside of here, so you can kind of see how those adjust inside of this. Inside of here you can kind of get an idea of how that blend is going to work. The chamfer edge will do the same thing. It gives you the same sort of UI. You pick the edge, but right now you can't pick additional points. That's not in the product right now. That'll be enhanced, but you can go in here and put a number of points that you want, hit set number, and those will all appear, and then you can just pick each one of these to adjust that chamfer. It gives you kind of a UI is very similar to the blend UI, because the edges look the same until you just can't see that flat surface. Let's just make this one a bit bigger so you can get an idea. So it looks like it's blending it, but it actually is going to do a chamfer. When you hit OK, it's actually making a smooth flat edge cut along that item. So very cool blend feature. So something you couldn't definitely not easily create in prior versions or prior releases. You can do so now with the variable chamfer. Okay. Let me move over to some other general enhancements. One of these new enhancements, I guess I could just do it on this other file as well, is the attachment point display. If you go and create some attachment points, previous versions had a little indicator that was one color. Now it actually has changed to be more visual, so you can see the blue is always going to be your Z axis, and then your red is going to be like your X axis or your length axis. And if you click those attachment points, when they highlight yellow, it'll actually put the X and the Z on there, so you've got a better idea of which axis you're working on inside of there. It kind of helps you visualize what you're working on, which, especially when you have your TriBall on, which handle is doing what you're working on. So that's a nice little small improvement with the attachment points, especially with people who are doing more configurable parts or modular components and building all these attachments. This will make life a lot easier to build that. Some other improvements are on the import capability. We've added two items here. One is very, very cool that I like. One is if you go ahead and import, let me just go to my files here. I have an inventor file. In my case, I can use, it doesn't matter if it's imported graphics or solid, but we're just going to go ahead and import the solid data inside of here. What the improvement is, you don't have any options or anything, it doesn't tell you anything, but what is really nice is if this inventor file has the capability to store metadata like property information, part number, description, custom attributes, in the source application, Inventor, UG, SolidWorks, any of the native file formats, any of those formats that store that type of information as property information, the translator can actually understand that information now and then import it in with your solid or graphical representation. For example, if I look at my part, if we select over to our property browser, notice it automatically transferred in the part number that was stored with it, that was from Inventor, and the description that it has with it. It also has all the custom properties that were also stored with it. So you have things like creation date, design state, all the stuff that could have been stored in that particular product, material settings inside of here. And you'll also even notice if you go to the material tab, it even picked up the material name and the density that was used for it, so we can actually calculate the mass properly when it comes into IronCAD. So a very cool way to transition customers that are coming from native systems that already built all this data or property information on their parts. They want to bring it into IronCAD and reuse those parts. They now can carry a lot of the information that they created or stored with that in IronCAD. So very cool enhancement. I really like that one. Another enhancement that we've done is with the graphical import. One of the things with the graphical that's different than some of our other importing is we have this ability in our import options, specifically for like Step and Pro E, that you can actually, if there's multi-bodies in the part. So for example, a lot of systems like SolidWorks or UG, Pro E, those guys, they can actually create a single part and have multiple bodies that represent other parts inside of their files. When you bring those into the solid formats, we could of course support that, and it would look like our structured part where you'd have a single part and all the bodies below it, and we could add that for those particular file formats. The thing that we noticed when you imported graphical representation, it only brought in each one of those bodies were treated as separate parts. So they saw the body lumps or the graphical representation as lumps and created individual parts. So the downside is when you looked at your scene browser, you would see 30 parts or something like that. And then if you try to convert it over to a solid, once it's already in as graphical, you convert it to solid, it came into as one part. So there was some confusion there. Also, in some cases, it may import the entire graphical representation as a single lump. So you would have one import that had all these B-reps, but we couldn't decipher it, so it comes in as one single lump instead of all these individual parts. So you couldn't even edit it. You would see this big massive assembly. You couldn't edit it or do anything with it because it saw it as one graphical representation. So we actually enhanced this import capability to support multi-body. So we'll automatically detect it and actually will build bodies for graphical representation. So I have a very large file here. This is a 200 meg file or something like that, and I'm just going to go ahead and open this file. It's going to take a few minutes. Even for a graphical file, it's quite large inside of here, but it's a good representation for this case. So let's give it a second, and we will wait. If you imagine if it takes a minute or so, to import this as a graphical, you can kind of imagine how much it takes to import it as a solid. So quite a large improvement if you can actually import as the graphical file. Okay, so it's gone through the processing. Now we're just building the graphical information and display. I'll give it a few more seconds. And this, of course, is working on my laptop, which is a Dell Precision M3800. It does have a pretty decent graphics card. It's got the NVIDIA, I think, M2000 on it, and it also has a solid-state hard drive which if you have the chance to have one of those, I highly recommend it. It makes file saves and opens a lot faster, and also just your startup of your machine. Okay, so anyways, this is a graphical file. There is no data behind it. If we go to our scene browser, you'll see that it is a graphical file. Before, you would just have this graphical lump, and you wouldn't be able to do much with it. You couldn't inspect inside of here or see what's inside of this particular file. If you expand it now, you'll notice that we have bodies listed here. So you'll see it has 713 different parts of this file. You can see all the individual bodies inside of here. You can select them inside of that tree if you like, or you can just individually select these guys now and just right click. You have options to hide this, so if you wanted to just kind of drill down and see inside this. I can just go through this. I'm selecting a few parts here. Let me get this guy here and hide this body. I can now actually inspect and see what's inside of this particular part. It's more capable options here, so now I know what's inside that object graphically and visibly. I can actually do more things with that, and you can go back and see which ones are hidden, and show those bodies if you want to bring certain bodies back. Whatever, you can hide those, hide and show. So it's basically a really nice enhancement for inspection inside of here. So these are some improvements on the general product of IronCAD. A lot of them give you a lot of good productivity improvements, like the TriBall enhancements and the folder displays. So I think a lot of these will help out, especially new users coming along, and making it a lot easier for them to orientate and position objects and things like that. So hopefully everybody loves these improvements, and we'll continue to add more.